Inflation represents a fundamental challenge in the realm of economic systems, where the value of currency diminishes over time, affecting everything from daily transactions to long-term savings. At its core, this phenomenon arises when the quantity of money in circulation expands faster than the production of goods and services, leading to a gradual decline in what each unit of currency can purchase. This isn't merely a modern issue. It has roots stretching back through centuries of human civilization, influenced by decisions made by rulers, bankers, and policymakers. In ancient times, for instance, empires grappled with balancing expansive ambitions against limited resources, often resorting to manipulations of their monetary systems that sowed the seeds of economic instability. Such actions not only altered trade dynamics but also reshaped social structures, as ordinary citizens bore the brunt of these shifts. To understand inflation's mechanics, consider its dual interpretations that have evolved over time. Historically, scholars viewed it primarily as an expansion of the money supply, whether through minting more coins or extending credit beyond sustainable levels. This perspective highlighted the direct role of authorities in creating excess liquidity, which inevitably drove up the cost of essentials as more currency competed for the same limited supply of commodities. By the mid-20th century, however, the emphasis had shifted toward measuring inflation through increases in consumer prices, focusing on observable effects like higher costs at markets or fuel stations. This redefinition allowed governments to frame the problem as external pressures rather than internal policy choices. Yet the link remains clear. Monetary expansion fuels price hikes, which in turn erode the real income of households and businesses. Central banks play a pivotal role in this process through their control of interest rates, which act as a regulatory mechanism for economic activity. When price pressures mount rapidly, these institutions elevate borrowing costs to discourage excessive lending and spending, thereby reducing the flow of money and tempering inflationary trends. Conversely, in periods of sluggish growth or declining prices, they lower rates to stimulate investment and consumption, injecting vitality into the economy. This approach aims to maintain equilibrium, but it underscores a reality where individual financial decisions are influenced by unelected bodies, often prioritizing macroeconomic stability over personal wealth preservation. For families relying on loans for homes or education, higher rates could mean deferred dreams and heightened anxiety about future repayments, while low rates might encourage risky borrowing that later proves burdensome. Achieving zero inflation might seem ideal, with money supply perfectly aligned to economic output, ensuring stable prices. In practice, however, most central banks pursue a modest annual target, often around 2%, arguing that it promotes circulation by dissuading cash hoarding and facilitates debt management for both public and private sectors. Deflation, where prices drop, is seen as a greater threat, as it could lead to postponed purchases in anticipation of further declines, stalling commerce, and deepening recessions. This deliberate policy choice means that currencies are engineered to lose value incrementally, a design that benefits debtors, including governments with vast obligations, but disadvantages savers who watch their nest eggs shrink in real terms. Over generations, this subtle erosion can widen inequality, as those with access to appreciating assets like property or stocks fare better than wage earners living paycheck to paycheck. The long arc of history illustrates these principles through vivid episodes, revealing how inflation has repeatedly tested societies. In the Roman Empire, during the 3rd century AD, emperors faced mounting fiscal pressures from military campaigns and administrative costs. To fund these without raising taxes excessively, they progressively debased the silver denarius by alloying it with base metals, maintaining its nominal value while reducing its intrinsic worth. Merchants and farmers who depended on consistent trade began to demand more coins for their wares as confidence waned, triggering widespread price increases. This stealthy devaluation not only strained household budgets. Imagine a laborer in Rome struggling to afford grain that once cost far less, but also contributed to the empire's eventual fragmentation as economic discontent fueled political unrest and invasions. The uncertainty of not knowing if tomorrow's wages would suffice bred fear among the populace, eroding the social cohesion that had once bound the vast territory. Centuries later, the influx of precious metals from the New World in the 16th century transformed Europe's economy in unexpected ways. Spain's exploitation of mines like Potosi flooded the continent with silver, dramatically increasing the money supply without a corresponding rise in agricultural or manufactured output. This imbalance sparked the price revolution, a prolonged period where costs for food, housing, and labor escalated across nations from England to the Ottoman Empire. For a typical European family in the 1550s, this meant reallocating scarce resources amid rising expenses, with artisans and peasants feeling the pinch most acutely as their earnings failed to keep pace. The ambition of colonial powers to amass wealth through extraction had unintended consequences, fostering inflation that persisted for over 100 years and influencing trade patterns that laid groundwork for modern global commerce. In the long term, it accelerated the shift toward mercantilism, where nations sought to control resources more tightly to avoid similar vulnerabilities. The 20th century brought even more extreme manifestations, demonstrating inflation's potential to unravel entire societies. Post-World War I Germany, burdened by reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, turned to unrestrained money printing to meet obligations. What began as a pragmatic response spiraled into hyperinflation by 1923, with the mark's value plummeting so drastically that citizens carried wheelbarrows of cash for basic purchases. Workers, paid multiple times daily to outrun price surges, experienced profound desperation. Families watched lifelong savings vanish, igniting widespread resentment and paving the path for radical political changes, including the ascent of authoritarian regimes. The pressure on leaders to stabilize the currency highlighted the human cost. Not just financial ruin, but a collective loss of faith in institutions, with long-lasting effects on Germany's economic policies for decades afterward. Similar dynamics played out in the United States during the 1970s, amid the abandonment of the gold standard in 1971 and successive oil crises. The Nixon administration's decision to decouple the dollar from gold allowed for greater monetary flexibility, but combined with energy shortages, it ushered in stagflation, a toxic mix of high inflation and stagnant growth. American households grappled with soaring costs for necessities while job opportunities dwindled, forcing many to make tough choices like cutting back on education or healthcare. This era shattered the post-war optimism, instilling a sense of vulnerability among the middle class and prompting reforms in monetary policy that emphasized inflation control. Globally, nations like Argentina in the late 20th century and Zimbabwe in the 2000s suffered repeated bouts of hyperinflation due to fiscal mismanagement, where governments printed currency to bridge deficits. In Argentina, citizens developed habits of converting savings to foreign currencies out of fear, while Zimbabwe's trillion-dollar notes symbolized utter economic despair, leaving populations scarred by the humiliation of worthless money and fostering ongoing political instability. These patterns reveal inflation as a mechanism of wealth redistribution, often favoring those with tangible assets or influence over those dependent on cash flows. Governments leverage it to dilute debts, easing fiscal burdens at the expense of savers, while banks profit from loans repaid in devalued terms. Yet, the deeper impact lies in the erosion of societal trust. When people doubt the reliability of their currency, it undermines planning for the future, breeds cynicism, and can lead to broader conflicts. Historical precedents, from Rome's decline to Weimar's chaos, show that unchecked inflation doesn't merely adjust economies, it fractures communities, amplifying divisions between the resilient elite and the struggling masses. In contemporary times, this acceptance of mild inflation as a norm persists, with metrics like the Consumer Price Index guiding policy, despite criticisms that it overlooks key pressures such as housing or medical expenses. This selective measurement enables authorities to declare stability even as families sense otherwise, masking the systemic bias toward expansionary policies. Paradoxically, inflationary environments can create openings for adaptation. Survivors of crises often pivot to durable investments, as seen in post-plague Europe where wage earners gained bargaining power, or in recent financial downturns where cash-rich individuals acquired undervalued properties. Throughout history, alternatives to fiat currencies have emerged as hedges against such erosion. Gold, with its finite supply and universal appeal, served as a stable store of value amid collapsing regimes, outlasting empires due to its resistance to arbitrary debasement. In the present digital landscape, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin offer a similar promise through capped supplies and decentralized structures, appealing to those wary of central control despite their price fluctuations. These innovations underscore a persistent quest for monetary integrity, challenging the inflationary tendencies baked into traditional systems. Ultimately, grasping inflation's historical trajectory equips individuals to navigate its rhythms, recognizing it as a deliberate element of economic governance rather than an unavoidable fate. By examining these cycles, we see how policy choices ripple through lives, demanding vigilance to protect against the subtle theft of value. For more deep, carefully researched stories from economic history, subscribe to our channel, Einstein of Economy.